We are here at the European Parliament today with Mr. David McAllister, Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament, to discuss about the outcomes of the Turkish elections and the future relations between Europe and Turkey. First of all, I would like to ask you if you were surprised by the outcome of these elections, and how would you evaluate them? Do you think they were free and fair?
I wasn't actually surprised about the outcome of the elections. This was to be expected, and we should respect the decision, the democratic decision of the Turkish people. They have made their choice. However, the circumstances of these elections were extraordinary. Turkey is in a state of emergency. Thousands of oppositional politicians, journalists, activists are in prison. So the whole framework of this election wasn't really what we would call free and fair, but this is the result, and now I do hope that Mr. Erdogan and his political friends will go in a different direction like they haven't done in the last years.
After this election, the new presidential system will be implemented, and it may raise some concerns that Turkey will not be able to meet the Copenhagen criteria. And do you think that in this context, a strategic partnership would better represent the new political realities between Turkey and Europe, rather than the current EU accession process?
Turkey has gone in a different direction than it used to do for many years now, with regards to the situation of the rule of law, the freedom of media, the freedom of political expression, many other things. We are concerned, and we do hope that President Erdogan will now end the state of emergency so Turkey can eventually return to political normality. Because the European Union is a union of values, and because we have strict Copenhagen criteria, for many years now, no new chapters have been opened with Turkey in the ongoing EU accession negotiations. The European Parliament, already more than a year ago, voted with a large majority that we were in favour of freezing the accession negotiations. We don't believe it makes sense to continue EU accession negotiations. But it's not up to us to decide, it's up to the member states to decide, but in the moment we're going nowhere.
And as you said before, there was, after the 2016 coup, there was a crackdown on the opposition. In particular, during campaign rallies, President Erdogan said many times that Europe is providing a safe haven for what he calls traitors, mainly Kurds and people affiliated with the Gulen movement. Furthermore, he added that after the election he was going to bring back home these so-called traitors. And referring to the recent abduction of Turkish nationals affiliated to the Gulen movement in Western Balkans countries, are you concerned that something similar could happen in Europe? For example, in countries like Germany or the Netherlands or Belgium, where there are already political tensions and polarizations inside the Turkish community. Do you think that something similar could happen?
Despite the difficulties we have in the ongoing EU accession negotiations, and I don't believe that EU membership is an adequate format for Turkey, this country remains an important partner for us. We are together in NATO, we are allies. Turkey is an enormously important trade partner for us, and millions of people of Turkish origin live in countries in the European Union, including my home country, Germany. So the people, the Turkish people living in Germany, or the German citizens of Turkish origin, are an enormously important living bridge between our countries. And that's why we want to reach out to the Turkish community in Germany and saying, your new home country is Germany, and we want you to become active German citizens, and what we share in Germany are the values of democracy, the rule of law, human dignity, human rights, religious tolerance, and also equal rights for women and men, just to name a few. So we want to strengthen a democratic, rule of law based Turkish society. And we should always never forget that nearly 50% of Turkish people at elections vote for parties in favour of these democratic European values. Now, the accusations of President Erdogan are well known. He repeats them in public very often. I don't want to go into detail because I've learned something in politics. You shouldn't ask questions if you don't have to answer. You don't need to answer questions if you have to. But what I would say in general is I do hope that Turkey will now return to political normality after all the exciting moments, that the state of emergency will end, and that a Turkish state needs an independent and efficient judiciary which can operate without political influence. That's my wish for Turkey.
And concerning what can be considered a competitor of the European Union, Russia, do you think that in the near future, in the future, we will see a strengthening of the relations between Turkey and Russia on some strategic issues like the military, economy, or energy? And if this happened, what could be the impact on the relations between Brussels and Ankara?
Well, as I pointed out, I believe that Turkey is an important partner for the European Union. The idea of a strategic partnership, a privileged partnership, whatever, is something we should work on. We also need a close cooperation on customs, and whatever it takes beyond EU membership, the European Union should be interested in having an as close possible relationship with our friends and partners in Turkey. But there are some issues where we disagree, and where we fundamentally disagree, and that is why the EU accession negotiations are in a deep freeze. Turkey is for good reasons a NATO ally, and I strongly believe in the concept that in good or in bad times, NATO allies stand together. But we have seen in the last 2 or 3 years some very different political views when it comes to foreign security policy between Turkey on the one hand and us in Europe and the Americans on the other hand. The Russian-Turkish relations traditionally were always rather difficult. There has been some rapprochement, but if you have a closer look at it, always be aware of that the Russians are playing their own game, and sometimes they might have similar interests as Turkey, but in other cases they won't. And Turkey has been a reliable NATO partner for many decades, and I think it's also in the Turkish interest to remain in the solidarity of the Western world.
And finally, as you said before, Europe represents democratic values, and in face of the new presidential system that is being implemented in Turkey, how do you think Europe can strike a balance between the need to cooperate with Turkey on some sensitive matters like migration, energy, and security on one hand, and on the other hand, keep upholding these democratic values?
Well, first of all, the Venice Commission, which advises the Council of Europe on constitutional and legal matters, had a very critical judgment of the constitutional reform in Turkey, and it's a pity that despite this criticism of the Venice Commission, the Turkish constitution has now been changed, but we have to accept this. It's a political decision in Turkey. The European Union has many partners, neighbours, which don't 100% share our views. And what I see with regards to Turkey, this country is an important partner for us when it comes to security issues, energy, trade, infrastructure, many, many other things. And this is where we should continue to cooperate. And we as a European Union are ready to support civil society, democracy, free media in Turkey, because of course we want to support all those countries who share our European democratic values. And you can put it on the very basic formula. If you're dealing with the European Union, because we are a values-based organisation, it's more for more and less for less. And that's why the degree of our cooperation with other countries very much depends also on the issue if they share our same values.
Great. Well, thank you very much for giving us your time and hosting us here today, and sharing your thoughts on the future of EU and Turkey's relations.